Hello, it's December 1989, and you're a music fan. You love Melody Maker and NME and Sounds magazine, and you like to read them and find out what's happening in the world of music that you love so much. You've heard of Warhammer and Games Workshop, but you don't really know very much about it, other than the fact that apparently they're starting to move into records, which is quite intriguing. But you're reading through this bumper Christmas issue of Sounds magazine, and you come across something very special. An exclusive board game designed by Games Workshop, where you are a cantankerous Gretchin running around the Talisman city trying to get your hands on tickets for the latest Boltthrower gig. What? I'm Jordan. This is Jordan Sorcery, and today it's Boltthrower or Bust. Yep, that's right. There is an actual Games Workshop board game included in this newspaper magazine about music, Sounds magazine, from December 1989. And we're going to take a look at all of the ins and outs of this curious bit of Games Workshop history. But I suppose the context for this might be relevant, because in the 80s, in the late 80s and early 90s, Games Workshop was exploring all of these different worlds. It wasn't just going to be about making board games and miniatures and role-playing games. They wanted to try out other stuff too. Of course, there are famous experiments like GW books that didn't really work out all that well, but would be revived for things like the Black Library, hugely successful when it came back in the late 90s. But there are other things that Games Workshop tried as well that have not been resurrected, that have not been revisited because they were just wild and out there and very, very, a fun idea that maybe doesn't make an awful lot of sense, at least not now looking back. I guess at the time there was more logic to some of these decisions and experiments that were worth trying out. One of which, of course, is Warhammer Records, a record label created by Games Workshop that would actually have proper rock bands on it and release proper rock albums featuring Games Workshop art, and it was called Warhammer Records. But there is one band who are not on the Warhammer Records label, but have an overlapping history with Games Workshop as well, which is what led to this very weird, very wonderful piece of Christmas Games Workshop ephemera. So I guess let's talk a bit about that context, the Warhammer Records piece that this was a lead into, and then we can go back and we can get into Sounds and we can take a look at the game that's inside this magazine. The Warhammer Records project saw about half a dozen albums released. They each featured Warhammer artwork on the liner notes and the covers, and some even had Warhammer lyrics and track names that related directly to the worlds of 40k and Warhammer Fantasy. There may not have been a Misty Mountain Hop or a Battle of Evermore in the mix, but there was Get Out of My Way by D-Rock or Drock, however you want to pronounce it, which featured Brian May on guitar. Along with the aforementioned Drock, there was also albums by Wraith, Saxon, and Rich Rags. So it was before Warhammer Records actually came into being in 1989 when Games Workshop first did their sound check with the world of rock music, and that was with the band Boltthrower. Signed to Nottingham-based label Earache Records, Boltthrower were working on a new album in 1988, some of which was played on a John Peel session, recorded at the BBC in January of that year. Apparently, someone at Games Workshop enjoyed the music so much that they reached out and offered to provide the art for the band's next album, an offer gleefully accepted. Some of the songs from the Peel session had directly referenced 40k, such as tracks like Eternal War and Realm of Chaos. It's not clear if the band wrote those tracks before or after collaboration with GW had started or conversations had been had, or if they were just big fans in the first place and had always intended to call those tracks those things. Whatever the case, Boltthrower's second studio album, Realm of Chaos: Slaves to Darkness, would be released in 1989, and it featured the John Sibbick art from the cover of the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader book. By that time, many more tracks for the album were recorded, and they orbited the 40k universe. There were names like Through the Eye of Terror, Plague Bearer, and Dark Millennium on the track listing. In 1989, the Boltthrower boys would go on their UK Grind Crusher tour. That would feature support acts including Morbid Angel, Napalm Death, and Carcass. And in order to promote this tour of the UK, Earache Records would collaborate with Games Workshop on an advert that was featured inside this issue of Sounds. And that would lead to this very curious game. But what was Sounds? The newspaper format Sounds magazine covered pop and rock music and was first published in October 1970. It continued as a weekly rival to other magazines like Melody Maker and NME until it ceased publication in April 1991. Now, I'm not really that up on the Stone Roses or Buzzcocks or Joy Division or what you might call cool bands at all, to be honest. I don't really know much about music history, and I'm not really very clued up on the UK music scene. But as I understand it, Sounds magazine was hugely influential. It was in its pages that terms like Britpop were first coined. It had contributions from people like Marianne Hobbs and John Peel. And it was from Sounds magazine that Kerrang first originated. It was a small section in the Sounds magazine that would go on to become its own magazine, its own music channel, and whatever else it is that Kerrang does these days. In December of 1989, just as that Grind Crusher tour was underway and the Realm of Chaos album had recently hit stores, Sounds published its bumper double-sized Christmas issue. The cover promised features on Simple Minds in Australia, the rags to riches story of the Stone Roses, U2 live in Paris, and more content about Henry Rollins, The Grid, Gary Newman, and Metallica. On the contents page, though, is the real reason that we are here. Boltthrower or bust. Join the Gretchin on their quest to a Boltthrower gig in a game exclusively designed by Games Workshop. Now, this was not the first time that GW and Earache and Sounds magazine had partnered up. There had actually been, just a few months earlier, a huge giveaway in Sounds magazine of Games Workshop stuff to celebrate the release from Earache of Boltthrower's Realm of Chaos album. But as far as I know, this is the first time that Games Workshop released an exclusive board game in the British music press, specifically about Boltthrower. But do correct me in the comments if I'm mistaken in that assumption. The Games Workshop board game Talisman, designed by Bob Harris, was first released in 1983 to huge success. People couldn't get enough of its accessible and relatively simple gameplay, and its generic but fun fantasy setting inspired by D&D. Over the next few years, GW released a host of expansion sets, one simply called Talisman Expansion Set, and others like The Adventure, City, Dungeon, and even Dragons. The game really did embrace its D&D inspirations, and it featured all kinds of fantasy monsters, but it also revelled in its uniquely Games Workshop origins as well. With the absolutely unhinged Talisman Timescape expansion in 1988, it even featured Space Marines, Astropaths, and Chainsaw Warriors. So it's probably pretty apt for Talisman to be the basis of one of the weirdest, wildest bits of Games Workshop marketing possibly ever. You are playing as one of 4 Gretchin who are racing around Talisman City, desperately trying to find out the location for a secret Boltthrower gig. And you also need to get tickets to that gig in order to get in and win the game. It is as bonkers as it sounds. And there are no credits for who actually designed this game. So it could have been based just on Bob Harris's original work for Talisman. It could have been anyone in the design team who modified it and updated it. But it's clearly the bones of Talisman, and Talisman City in particular. But there are all sorts of extra gubbins that really give it so much ridiculously fun character too. The rules for this Christmas gig game of Giggling Gretchin are pretty easy to learn. Each turn, you roll a dice and move that many spaces around the board as you search for a ticket for and the location of the secret Boltthrower gig. Your Gretchin has 4 characteristics that you will use to beat up other Gretchins you meet and survive your ordeal. There's strength for scrapping, brains for thinking, lives for living, and gold for shopping. If you run out of lives, you fall unconscious and get nicked for vagrancy. As you move around the board, you can visit various locations and do some fun stuff. The board itself is a reworked version of the original Talisman City board, featuring art by Mark Craven and Bill Sedgwick, the artist who created the gobbledygook comic strip in White Dwarf. Certain locations in the city have been changed, so now there's stuff like the Ticket Tout and a pawnbroker shop where you might be able to get hold of a ticket for the Boltthrower gig. The Armory Nightclub still sells weapons, but the guard in the town square might let you know where the secret gig is taking place, only if you're lucky. There's also the Earache Inn, where you can use your brains to try and best Digby the Orc at cards and maybe win a gig ticket instead. The cutout playing pieces feature Gretchin art by the marvellous Paul Bonner. The 4 Gretchin were taken from Bonner's page art that populates the 40k Orc books, like Here We Go and Wah. Some of this art you can actually buy the originals of right now from Paul Bonner directly, which is awesome, to be honest. I'm not sure if the quite brilliant Toad drawing was also featured anywhere else in a GW publication, or if it was created exclusively for this advert. So if you've spotted it anywhere else, please let me know in the comments. So far, so Talisman, but these are Gretchin we're talking about, so the special rules would elevate this into something sublimely silly like you would expect. At the start of the game, each player is instructed to write down 6 possible forfeits on bits of paper, all of which are scrunched up and put into a bowl. If you get an unlucky roll whilst wandering about the city, you would have to complete one of these forfeits. And if you find yourself in the same square as the Jester, you can challenge them to a forfeit off, taking it in turns to complete forfeits until someone fails or refuses. The winner then gets to become the new court Jester. Instead of fighting when you bump into another Gretchin on a square, you might actually choose to team up. One Gretchin will stand on the shoulders of the other, and together they will wear a massive trench coat. Thus disguised, you can move about the board as a pair, working together in both of your turns. Oh, and in order to represent the disguised pair of Gretchin, one of the players has to sit on the lap of the other. If you made it to the secret gig together, then you'd have to throw off your disguise and best each other in a trial by ordeal, doing things like drinking a pint of water fastest or running around the block. Of course, at any moment a disguised Gretchin could just decide to fleece their mate and run off with their stuff, or even ambush them in a sudden scrap if you'd rather not have to deal with all those ordeals that are coming your way. If you're interested in playing Boltthrower or Bust, I would recommend checking out the excellent Talisman Island website, where there is an amazing updated fan version of the entire thing. It's simple, it's silly, and it is perfect for getting together all of the little gremlins and Gretchins in your own family and playing around the table on Christmas Day. Boltthrower or Bust is actually very, very simple. I mean, it is an advert after all, so what might you expect? But it is just absolutely wild to me, and wonderful as well, that this thing exists at all. We're talking about a game designed by Games Workshop, featuring Games Workshop art, published in a music magazine for a band that was not on the Warhammer Records label. The Warhammer Records label didn't even exist yet. How wild is it that this is an actual thing? I think it's fantastic. It is, in terms of gameplay, not that dissimilar to a little board game I have designed to go with my Jordan Sorcery's Familiars miniature range that was sculpted by Gary Morley. They are back in stock and available now. Just saying, so you can check those out via the link in the description. What a segue. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Games Workshop can do wild marketing. Maybe I can do a little bit too. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. I'm so glad that this exists, and I'm so glad that I was able to get a hold of a copy and play some of it, because it's just wonderful. It's silly. It's great. In truth, there are loads of other pieces of just this kind of strange, lost Games Workshop ephemera. Games that were produced or projects that didn't see the light of day, all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. And that is the work that I do. I am trying to research and document as much of the history of Games Workshop and Warhammer specifically as I can, interview the people involved, talk to everyone who I can have conversations with about all of the wonderful stuff that Games Workshop have done over the years. That is why I really appreciate any support that you can offer, whether that's here by commenting and liking and sharing the videos, whether that is becoming a member of my channel on YouTube, whether that is joining my Patreon, where I am doing a 12 days of Patreon this December with loads of exclusive content. There's some exclusive interviews, a guest blog post by Rick Priestley, some other really fun stuff that you can go and check out via the link in the description below, or just go to patreon.com/JordanSorcery. I hugely appreciate any support that you can offer. It is the only reason I'm able to continue looking into stuff like this that I just find to be so wonderful and so worth spending a few minutes chatting about, because it's awesome. In fact, there is another story that I've heard about Games Workshop's involvement in some marketing, actually designing some stickers to go in cereal boxes in the late 80s and early 90s. That's another thing that I am continuing to find information about and trying to research. Who knows if there's more to that story and I'll ever be able to actually make a video about it, but I'm continuing to look at stuff like that. That is what is just awesome about this work that I love so much, because as well as the deep history, there are these just very odd corners of Games Workshop legend that I think are worth investigating too. But that is all I've got time for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and Merry Christmas.